Before we start, I will try to be as unbiased as possible. John Doe had probably the worst history in this game, aside from Noli.
We only have one shot? Is this a reference? Don't come back.
In the early days, John Doe was agreed upon to be the worst of the 4 killers. Everybody was using that fucking 7-frame 40 damage move. Yes, I'm still complaining about that. There were a ton of issues at hand that made it nearly impossible to play as Jonathan, so in the early days of Forsaken, I rarely, if ever, saw anybody play John Doe. Simply because he was just too hard to play. Hard in the sense that it's not difficult to grasp, but it's difficult to deal with everything else. I'll explain in detail later, but when I dropped Jason and played John Doe for the first time, I had a lot of fun. Before, I disabled being a killer altogether. Whenever I played killer, I felt insanely one-sided towards the survivors. This led to a very strange gap in my career where my survivor wins are skyrocketing into the 2000s, but my killer wins make it seem like I'm a basic noob. Learning killer was so awful since you can't practice being a killer because you get to be one every 10 to 20 minutes. John Doe was an entirely blind killer for me, with me knowing practically very little about him and only knowing that he was the underdog among the killers. So I played, and lost a couple of times, and then I won some. Despite my losses, I kept playing as John Doe. Why? Because it was fun. John Doe's ability was single-handedly one of the best in the game for creating death traps and trapping survivors in them. One of my favorite things to do as John Doe is someone rolls up to a loop they love, only to find it entirely trapped by digital footprints. Despite all of my victories, I still consider John Doe to be the weakest, since not only did he require setup, map RNG, and map awareness for a quick kill, he was certainly lacking in a lot of departments. Sure, he was strategic and technically powerful, but man, were those windups a living hell for anybody who decided to play him. Despite his flaws, I pushed through and got him to milestone 4 before his buff was ever even conceived. I pulled him out of the rugs and I made him a diamond. No other killer made me as happy as John Doe did. Surprise to me when I find out that he gets buffed. And buffed. And buffed. And then some more. To be honest, he did need the buffs for the state he was currently in, as almost every survivor could make the biggest gap when running away from that corrupt energy windup, but we'll talk about that later. There were a lot of other issues, simply being that John Doe's damage output was way too small compared to the other killers, and suddenly that atmosphere changed. With changes being made, he went from being the worst to being a close contender for the best killer in the game. What exactly happened? Well, let's talk about John Doe. A man corrupted by the defunct code of Roblox's early days, with the only objective he has being to kill everyone in sight. I want to begin with his early history, as I would love to talk about how I still loved him at his worst. When I first played John Doe, he certainly had a lot of weaknesses that brought him down a ton. I don't have any clips of me getting hit with said weaknesses.
What?
But I do have some clips of me abusing said weaknesses. Let's go on a very short list explaining the pretty major weaknesses John Doe used to have. And for future reference, I'll be mixing both current and past clips to get points across. I'll indicate whether or not you're seeing an old clip or a new one, since I don't have much footage of John Doe when he was a baby. So with that out of the way, let's get started, shall we? Problem number 1, windups. To start, corrupt energy is the only other move John Doe can use mid-chase, but even then it was such a long windup that it gave the survivors so much time to get distance. It didn't help the fact that John Doe's spikes were a lot slower, meaning that sometimes he couldn't even hit a survivor most of the time. It was also incredibly loud, alerting almost every other survivor that he's getting a wall off, so the element of surprise was rarely if ever used. Corrupt energy was also very easy to predict once you knew John Doe was popping it. In the time that they were winding up, you can break line of sight, stun them out of it, or simply run away. It's alright, we still have a digital footprint. This move is still easily one of his strongest moves, since it does 19 damage over time, applies slowness 2 for 10 seconds, and also gives John Doe speed 1 for 10 seconds. This was most certainly among the most deadly abilities he could use, and I'll admit, even back then it was a powerful move since you get to close off loops and get free hits in. What was the issue again? 3.3 seconds. For comparison, the average killer stun duration is around 3 seconds. Putting down a digital footprint meant you were stunning yourself to close a loop or a pathway. While 3 seconds doesn't seem like a lot, and also the reward for closing off a loop may seem like a good trade, may I remind you that John Doe can place up to 3 of these, making it so that placing all 3 down in loops would take 9 seconds, possibly even more if you're running from place to place. There was simply not enough time for John Doe to put his traps down and also kill the survivors. Time was such an important thing for John Doe because both of these abilities were already really long, allowing for survivors to get so much distance and making it harder for John Doe to close that gap. Oh, and 404 error windup is pretty nothing. It was like around 1 second, but it's still pretty bad. Most of my tracking during those days was with the Coolkid method, where I ran around the map until my stamina started to drain, telling me a survivor was near. So with all these windups, John Doe doesn't have any time to spare, especially if the survivors bomb the generators at the start. It became a legitimate strategy to put a trap on a generator to buy time, as you can nearly negate a whole minute with all 3 traps. Doing this was using his kit wrong, and John Doe in general was just very punishing to use. Another thing I should mention that isn't a windup is his trail, and how small it was. This was rarely a thought for John Doe, and now looking back on it, the trail was a pretty major part of his damage. Stepping on it for even a second will deal 8 damage, and if you constantly stack it, you can deal a really big amount of damage. The best part about this is the fact that the time it takes to deal the full 8 damage is very fast, meaning keeping a survivor in the trail can deal a huge amount of damage. One small issue, not only was it incredibly small, making it an afterthought and not part of John Doe's kit, but it just randomly disappears mid-match as well. I don't know what causes this, and it still happens today. The trail disappearing is such a huge loss for John Doe, as he loses a part of his kit that punishes jukes, sentinels, supports, and bad positioning. Keep in mind, while John Doe still could cut survivors off and guarantee a kill, he was competing against killers like Coolkid and 1x, who had much higher damage output and is not only faster but easier to manage. Coolkid had that one ability I'm practically dragging as a joke now, and 1x has ranged abilities, plus the extra poison damage. These two could keep up with the team while punishing anybody else who tries to intervene and still keep chase with whoever they were initially chasing. John Doe has an ability that barely sees any usage mid-chase, and it just takes way too long, and the speed after hitting it isn't enough to recover that distance. This just meant that he was an M1 killer who occasionally used walls to punish bad positioning. His M1s might as well have been his saving grace, since they did 28 instant
Bro, I killed you. What?
Even though his M1 seemed very long, it was 25 frames and was untouched. But oh my god, did it feel awful back then. The issue wasn't how quickly the move was, rather it was more of the fact that it was on a 2-second cooldown. Every time you missed, you had to wait 1.3 seconds until you could swing again, and while this isn't a long time, man did it suck. Because it was 2 seconds, survivors easily predicted when the next swing would come and pretty easily evaded every single swing. It didn't help the fact that during this time, most John Doe players would sprint and then M1, making it even more telegraphed. It was a really dark time for John Doe players, except for a few. People soon came to adapt and come up with a tech, one of them still being used today. I don't know what it's officially called, but I like to call it the fling tech. Because trying to manually aim with the walls, clutter the screen, and make it impossible to see the survivor, essentially making it a guessing game as to where they are, a tech was invented to counteract this. A John Doe user would either spin or look in the direction that is nowhere near the target, and with good timing, they could shift lock straight onto the target whenever it feels like the spikes would intercept them.
Damn!
Making the spikes burst from underneath their feet and flinging them. This was both unexpected and easy to use, since aiming with corrupt energy wasn't too hard with an absolute clear view of your target. Another quote-unquote tech that was quote-unquote discovered to counteract his weakness in M1s was pretty simple: M1 discipline.
Dodge. Dodge. Rats!
This tech isn't really a tech at all, rather it's just a good habit for all killers. If you notice someone cracking your ankles to the next dimension, you can just bait out their juke and then M1 when they least expect it. Not only that, you make them waste a ton of stamina by just being next to them. The TLDR is just play like an Elden Ring boss. These two made John Doe somewhat bearable, but then the developers didn't like the fact that he was this weak, so they gave him the first buff. You see, I would show the screenshot of the balance change in the Discord, but unfortunately the Discord got hacked and now that update log is lost to time. However, I still remember the change. Decreased windups. All of his abilities got buffed for their windups. Corrupt energy could now be used mid-chase, digital footprint no longer took a century to use, and now could be used to quickly block off an area, and 404 arrow was just as quick as 1x's unstable eye, I think at least. On top of that, they made the trail longer for him. I think it was in a previous update, I'm not too sure, but all I know is that he quickly climbed the ranks. His abilities, coupled with the speed that he gets from it, allowed him to legitimately keep up with the survivors. Corrupt energy could still... Problem number 2, chance. Well, to be honest, this wasn't just a chance problem. It was anyone who could stun, but chance was the best counterpick for John Doe, and still is. His passive, which, while being useful against Shaletsky's and guests, was a goldmine for chance. In case you don't know, Chance's flintlock stun gets lower the further away he is, being as little as 1 second. John Doe's passive makes it so that he can't be stunned for longer than 2.175 seconds. This meant that John Doe would be stunned for 1 second, right? No. It doesn't check if the stun should be 1 second. Rather, any and all stuns would always be 2.175 seconds. This meant that if you were doing anything, Chance could just roll up and shoot you from the furthest distance away and still get profit. The worst part about this was the fact that the unstable passive wasn't all too good. Other than the fact that it made you wake up faster, at the time it only gave you speed 1 for 3 seconds, which is kind of very little distance, but it's better than nothing, I guess. However, people weren't just stunning you out of the blue. No, they were straight up removing an entire ability from your roster. The worst part about this passive was the fact that it just straight up ignored stacking. Chance was the only sentinel, apart from 2x rework, to have a stacking debuff on their stun. Chance had their stun reduced by 15% for every other chance there was. However, it didn't matter for John Doe. 1 or 8 chances, he was getting the same 2.175 stun duration. It got even worse when he'd coordinate before the match and get a chance duo. In this game, I told the server to lock in against my friend Varlos just for funsies, and we all picked relatively good survivors. Guests could body block and get easy blocks in since the M1 was really long, and a discard to stall and save lives in case anybody got walled off or stepped in the digital footprint. Ignore the 3 Elliots, that was way too many. But what was important was the fact that me and one other person chose Chance. We both knew John Doe was weak against Chance, and I didn't even need to tell him to stun him out of corrupt energy. They already knew John's weaknesses. And then it clicked. John Doe's corrupt energy has a 15-second cooldown, and Chance's flintlock has a 30-second cooldown. Because there were 2 of us, we had the perfect opportunity to rotate and quite literally negate John Doe's primary ability. You know, the very wall that turns him into a strategic killer? Yeah, we just entirely removed that from his kit. During that whole match, he only managed to use corrupt energy without interruption 5 times. And we managed to interrupt it 7 times. Out of the 5 times he did manage to pull a corrupt energy off, he only managed to hit someone twice. And no, he didn't manage to cut someone off or get value from those other 3 walls. That meant out of the 6 minutes we did play, he only managed to get a valuable wall twice. That's insanely little for 6 minutes. The reason why we managed to even do that were 1, communication.
Go, no.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you, buddy. Thank you, buddy. Oh my god.
And 2, coordination.
Chance, I'm giving you the shot. Chance, you take the shot when he goes into the ground.
We didn't need to worry about range at all, so long as he was in our sightlines we could cancel all of his abilities. This meant that the only way he did damage was through digital footprints, his trail, and slashes. As you could probably tell, this isn't fun at all to play a strategic character and have one ability locked out for the entire game. What did the developers do to fix this? Nothing. It's still in the game and it's actually worse than before. The update prior to Noli added one more change to John Doe, that being a small change in John Doe's passive. It no longer activates on stun, meaning that getting stunned from a chance from miles away would no longer stun you for 2 seconds. It now stuns you for however far away he was. This applies to every other stun, meaning that a Shaletsky sword would stun you for 3 whole seconds, a guest parry also for 3 seconds, and a 2-time backstab for 4 seconds. Unstoppable now only applies to 2 abilities, Corrupt Energy and 404 Air. While it seemed like nothing has changed, something did indeed change. For every sentinel alive in the match, John Doe's speed duration gets increased by 1. This means that if there are 2 chances, then John Doe would get a 4.5 second speed duration, which is pretty long. It's also likely that there is another sentinel in the match, and if so, it'll keep going up. This made a predicament for chances. This meant that stunning John Doe out of Corrupt Energy would need more thought and questioning whether or not a survivor could dodge Corrupt Energy or go for the stun and have them deal with the speed. However, with Corrupt Energy in specific, there's a problem. Yeah, it just doesn't work. If anything, this more so teaches chance players to time their shots so that they don't accidentally activate the passive. This meant that John Doe is now punished for bad positioning and awareness. the very thing he's supposed to be punishing the survivors for. So John Doe had a pretty rough start. How exactly did he become the best killer in the game? Well, throughout this entire segment I was sort of lying. While those weaknesses either don't exist anymore or are niche to a very specific survivor, I was ignoring the fundamental thing that makes John Doe the best killer in the Spectre: control. Corrupt Energy is such a powerhouse of an ability that even before the windup buff, blocking people off and creating a guaranteed death trap wasn't in the realm of impossible. This applies to Digital Footprint as well. Cutting off an entire pathway is so incredibly strong since you get to limit the map and create opportunities for Corrupt Energy to be in play. Take for example this LMS. We circle for a bit and I realized that, man, this guy knows how to loop. So I want to take a quick pause and have you, the viewer, try and guess what I did to make this LMS an instant win. With the footage I'm providing you right now, take in all of that information and try to guess what is the absolute best thing to do. If you said place a digital footprint here, then hell yeah you win. Why is this the best move for this scenario? Well, this one trap did so much that it probably did more than what I'm about to explain here. Firstly, I'm blocking off this path, meaning that they can't rotate to a more open part of the map, like the outdoors area. They still had rush hour as well, meaning that if I just continued chasing instead of placing it down, they could have easily taken a hit and popped their rush hour to get some insane distance and win LMS on the other side of the map. Not only that, the outdoors and hallway area are the only places in the map where my digital footprints hold no pressure on them, since my footprints are controlling this area in specific. Their saving grace was the outside area, so long as they made it there. If you said they could have just kept running and gone down and through the bedroom, not only could I have walled that off with Corrupt Energy, but I knew prior to that LMS that I'd placed the digital footprint at that exact spot. It's why they tried to go up and around to get a more open area of the map instead of taking that route. They can't go through me since I'm placing a digital footprint down, and they can't go through the bedroom because there's a footprint there as well. The only way to the outside area was to backtrack and come from the way that they came. Because of this, I know that he'll enter the blue room since he can't risk going through digital footprints, and they can't go up either since it leads to an incredibly easy wall. Their only way of surviving was to go through the blue room. With all of that information, lo and behold, I see them a few seconds later entering the blue room. Lightning question, why didn't I wall here? If we said because they still had rush hour, there wasn't a good enough corner, keep that on belt pressure, or they could easily break a line of sight, then you're right. We'll continue the chase and force them into a spot that will guarantee a wait. They just use rush hour and they're headed up. This one's a given. Tell me, dear viewer, what should I do next? That's right, one Corrupt Energy to block his path and give me a solid 15 seconds to try and kill him. I used 404 error to confirm they were stuck on the hook, and now it's time to reel in the fish. I followed them from behind, and after a few dodges it was inevitable and I ended up winning. Keep in mind, this wouldn't have been possible if it were not for that one digital footprint I placed. There was only one mistake I made that was kind of at fault of Elliot. I didn't guard the blue room enough. If they had enough stamina, they could have easily ran straight to the exit and won, but then they would have to deal with a slow burn chase where I just win the stamina game. Them breaking line of sight was smart, but ultimately their bad positioning is what made them die. This isn't the only moment of this happening either. There are countless times where I probably would have used my wall to deal damage, but I opt out and instead go for blocking their path. The intended way to play John Doe. Look at this clip. One of the most underrated wall spots is on this castle. The Shaletsky thinks I'm trying to hit him, and yeah, I do, but then he comes to the realization that he's boxed in, which results in a really quick death for him. Or like this moment where I totally didn't plan on hitting this straight Duskar. Just because I missed this wall doesn't make it a bad one. It was the perfect wall to stop this Shaletsky from running away.
That was accidental.
No, it wasn't. Shut up. Not only can this be used as a way to block pathing, but it can also be used to separate survivors and single them out. While Corrupt Energy can be this powerful, I think it's fair that it also has an equal counterplay, that being stuns. It's why I mentioned Corrupt Energy could be cancelled out if timed correctly. Corrupt Energy is universally an incredibly powerful move, and we haven't even gotten to the other two. Digital Footprint, like I said earlier, is an incredibly powerful tool since it entirely cuts off a pathway to a part of the map. If you wanted to, you could just turn what would have been a transition from the front of the map to the back into a dead end for easy pickings. You could also place these in spots that are very hard to see in. You have this spot near the arcade and horror hotel, right below the ramp in Brandon's place, and inside the castle in glass houses. It's a very simple move, but it can do a lot for John Doe. It's not like they can step on it either, since stepping onto it gives speed to John Doe, but also gives slowness too to the survivor who stepped on it. While I see some people say that survivors like Noob or 007 and 7 can disable these traps with their abilities, it's just not a good idea to step on them at all. Unless you have communication with the survivor survivor being chased, you can't disable these traps at all without helping John Doe. Like I said in my previous video, giving John Doe constant speed 1 for 10 seconds is brutal. Without these traps, John Doe wouldn't be able to do as much as he does today. This shouldn't be much of a surprise since he is a trapper killer. His main purpose is to trap. Another thing he could do is this. That's right. Remember that update regarding his passive? I mentioned how he can only activate when using corrupt energy or 404 air. This meant John Doe now had a third ability, a parry. While I'm not particularly fond of the fact that they're putting John Doe behind a pretty high skill floor, it's certainly a strong ability. 404 used to be just an ESP move that revealed the auras of survivors and really nothing else. Now it's primarily used to activate his passive. The increased seconds you get from speed hurts like hell, and most of the time it's enough to easily catch any survivor with the distance they try to make. Take a look at this clip. By no means is this guest player bad. They managed to parry me twice. However, I got back on my feet and stuck onto them like a bad smell. It was a slow burn and then they eventually died. 404 parrying hurts guests so badly that regardless of what they do after their block, they lose their stun. No matter if they do a parry or a regular punch, John Doe will wake up in 2 seconds. It's just a matter of giving them speed 1 or not. This affects every sentinel except 2-time. Now, sentinels would need to work a little bit harder since they need their stun to be a lot less predictable, and John Doe would need to be reactive enough to parry their stun. Another thing to mention, John Doe just straight up punishes the team for having sentinels in general. That speed 1 increased duration is no joke. Remember that guest from earlier? Both of the times he parried me, I never lost any distance. I was more on top of him than I was previously, and before we enter the conclusion, I would like to mention how powerful the trail can be. Like I said in the last video, it does 8 damage from simply stepping on it. This passive is more of an afterthought than an actual thing you can abuse, but there are scenarios where it would be very useful in getting good chip damage in. For example, sentinels trying to stun John Doe. They could accidentally walk into the trail and take chip damage. While 8 damage isn't a lot, it can stack to a pretty sizable health loss from the sentinels. 2-time Guest and Shaletsky particularly get heavily punished by this trail, and it's pretty bad for the latter two. If either Guest or Shaletsky tries to stun, they can either get parried or miss and get the trail punishment. This type of punishment is done by circling the survivor while they're still slow, forcing them into that 8 damage trail. I rarely see John Doe users even think about the trail for a second, but any good damage is good damage so long as there isn't a builder man to heal it. Not only that, corruption goes through resistance, very similarly to how bleed goes through resistance as well. The only difference between the two is that John Doe is not only a walking map hazard, but corruption deals so much damage so much faster. It also applies a visual debuff in the sense that invisible survivors practically get revealed seconds after stepping onto it. Alright, I talked enough about it. So let's look over everything we just talked about. Is John Doe the best killer? Well, if you sat me down and compared him to 1x, then arguably, yes, he is the strongest killer in the game. However, he has only one issue. He has too much. With how much I explained, he has quite a lot of uses for his kit. Corrupt Energy is a move that can be used to snipe people but also cut people off, with the latter requiring much more thought than any other killer would need to think about. John Doe would also need to know map layouts and routes to put efficient digital footprints down, and he would also need to remember exactly where they were placed so that if a survivor gets near those traps, he can try to lead them towards the puddle to trap them, or force them into stepping onto it. Both of these options allow you to get easy damage in and sometimes get whole kills early on. Not only that, you would also need to have your finger ready for that 404 parry whenever a sentinel is nearby. This is quite a lot of thought for John Doe, and forgetting about one aspect entirely heavily hinders your efficiency as a killer. It's unlike any killer in the game, and that includes Noli. Jason would really need to think about whoever is around the person they're chasing, and also not to be too deep into a survivor so that they don't develop tunnel vision. Coolkid needs to be aware of survivor mistakes as he has high burst damage and can swap targets instantly. 1x would need to think about where the survivors would be positioned while also trying to get the opportunity to hurt any bystanders that may be in the way. And Noli would need to be aware of how damaged the survivor team is before singling them out, as currently he has a kit meant for jumping from survivor to survivor, essentially keeping everybody low. John Doe has to juggle a lot of mental things and can sometimes slip and show weakness. He's designed to be a trapper killer who takes opportunities to trap survivors. All of his strength comes from being attentive and knowing exactly what to do under pressure. If you don't place a digital footprint down, then you won't be able to make it harder for survivors to traverse the map. If you don't use corrupt energy, you just straight up lose. If you don't use 4-4 air to parry, then you might win, but stuns would hurt since it would practically restart a chase entirely. It's the fact that John Doe can block and shut down loops, making him the perfect killer to single survivors out. The weirdest part is the fact that they buffed him again on the Noli update. They made the spikes go up faster and decreased the endlag for corrupt energy. Okay, Kaiser, stop buffing John Doe. He was fine prior to the unstoppable rework. You're just locking him behind a high skill floor and making it absurdly difficult for beginners to get into John Doe. I mean, in general, John Doe has always been a difficult character. He's a lot more manual than every other killer since he needs to use abilities at the right time to get good damage in. That and all the mental gymnastics you need to do mid-match. John Doe is by no means a weak killer. In my opinion, John Doe is right behind 1x in the tier list. Listen, while I just glazed the hell out of him on the second half, we can't just ignore the first half of the video. Chance is still an amazing counterpick to John Doe, now even stronger than before, and his windups are still windups. They have a set timer in which survivors know when they will appear. They can easily break out of the wall and get themselves untrapped. Take this clip for example. John Doe pushes me to this corner of the map by trapping the front of the house, and as soon as I notice I'm cornering myself, I start to book it to leave. He very obviously uses corrupt energy but already got the distance in. Now that he sees me at the very end, he entirely ditches the idea of trapping me and instead goes to damage me. Is why he went to the side last second. It was a reaction to seeing me unexpectedly at the end of the gate. Keep in mind, he still could have tracked me if he looked a little bit to the right, but my goal was to trade gaps, and I have. This means that John Doe players can be fooled, and very similarly to 1x, he requires visual information as to where the survivor is so that he can guess where they'll be next. Take this clip for example. When I see John Doe use corrupt energy, I immediately break line of sight and deviate from the path he expects me to go. Or hell, take this clip I already showed you beforehand. While I did manage to wall this path off, there was a slim chance that they could have made it past the wall in time had they kept running. It was slim, but the chance was still there. It's why I used 4-4 air to confirm my catch rather than gunning it straight to the fish. Under the right hands, John Doe is easily the best killer in the game. And by right hands, I mean my own. He certainly is a very punishing killer, as once again, his only move to deal damage in a chase is just one move. Digital footprint won't do anything else unless they step on it or accidentally corner themselves, and 4-4 error is an ESP move now turned into a parry. To put it simply, you can't mess up as John Doe. Other killers are relatively more forgiving than John Doe, as they have other means to either catch up or deal damage. Jason, Coolkid, and Noli have their sprint speeds, 1x has ranged abilities, and Noli can teleport to swap targets since he excels at group damage. John Doe is a lot less forgiving if you miss any abilities. Not being able to use corrupt energy will murder you, not placing any digital footprints down is just a bad habit, and not parrying would create a sizable distance for the survivors to regroup and gather their bearings. The only other killer that comes close to this kind of punishing gameplay is Jason. He has no other ranged abilities and no way to pressure the whole team or deal mass group damage. Coming out of a stun, Jason can't do anything other than continue chasing a survivor. Coolkid could use walkspeed or minions, 1x could mass infection, and Noli could teleport or use void rush. John Doe is an exceptional killer, but most definitely requires a lot more thought, and that's why he's lacking in a majority of tier lists. Why put in this much effort when I could get the same result from playing Coolkid or 1x? The reason why you rarely see John Doe players in the competitive side of Forsaken is exactly this. The amount of thought and effort to make this guy useful is so much compared to the other killers. By no means is this bad, since John Doe still possesses the ability to insta-kill a survivor, so long as they place their wall correctly. And that in and of itself is also an issue. You sort of rely on the survivor messing up and going to a spot where you could wall, but then again, you could lead the survivor to where you want them to be. In other words, John Doe is an amazing killer, punishing one at that, but fantastic both on paper and in execution. I love playing as John Doe, and I love fighting against him. I love him in the bedroom and in the Spectre. Yeah, chance can cancel you out of corrupt energy, but you can just go behind cover before popping it. To those who found new light to play John Doe, be as strategic as you can. You will lose, and that's a fact. This game is hilariously survivor-sided. Be as attentive as you can be to catch survivors in bad spots and parry those stuns. And most importantly of all, be as selfish as you want. These survivors are afraid of you and nobody else. So play with your food, because after all, they're all yours, Mr. Doe. Hello! I would like to thank you for watching this video till the very end. It was a lot of fun playing John Doe again, especially since I don't really see many John Doe players in public lobbies. Okay, say it with me now. Next video will be on Noli. Well, maybe. Going forward, my roadmap is looking at 3 killers in specific: Coolkid, Noli, and 1x, since that video is really outdated and my opinions have changed since then. Watch that 1x video with a bowl of salt. Had some very awful points in that video, considering it was my first time making commentary. If you had anything to add, tech I didn't mention, something I didn't explain fully or glossed over, please comment it down, since I'm not the head of balancing for Forsaken. You have yourself a good morning, afternoon, evening, and night. How's everyone in the chat? But a little bit on the outside. Where are you? Hello. You're...
No! Don't kill me!
What?
Run!
What? Oh, now I'm going after him. What are you talking about?
No!
No. You made it very clear. You made it very clear who you wanted to protect, bro.
No!
This won't kill you. That can't. Thank you for the speed boost, bro.
No! Brother!
What is going on, bro?